I want to tell you something before I get into this. I've been a translator aboard the Celestine Accord for going on 6 standard years now. 6 years of watching species from 17 different star systems try to talk to each other without accidentally starting a war. 6 years of learning that the universe is enormous and petty and beautiful and cruel, sometimes all in the same afternoon. In those 6 years, I thought I'd seen everything worth seeing. I hadn't. What happened aboard the Accord during the Velthani delegation visit? What happened between Lord Karind Velshavar of the Velthani Ascendancy and Lieutenant Commander Marcus Darren of the United Earth Fleet? That's the kind of thing that changes how you understand a species. Maybe 2 species, maybe yourself. Let me start from the beginning, or close enough to it. The Celestine Accord is a diplomatic cruiser. That's the official classification. In practice, it's a floating conference room the size of a small moon with better catering and worse politics. It exists for one purpose: to give species that can't stand each other a neutral place to be uncomfortable together without anyone getting shot. We were docked at Meridian Station when the Velthani arrived. Meridian Station sits at the junction of 3 trade corridors: the Keth Expanse, the inner spiral arm routes, and the newly opened terminus passage that cuts transit time between the outer colonies and the galactic core by something like 40%. It's valuable real estate. Every species with a faster-than-light engine and an ego wants a piece of it, and the Velthani are no exception. They arrived in a ship called the Eternal Ascendance. Of course they did. I watched it dock through the observation port on Deck 7, and I'll be honest, it was impressive. The Velthani build their vessels the way they build everything: tall, angular, crystalline. Their ship looked like someone had taken a cathedral and stretched it sideways across 300 meters of vacuum. It caught the light from Meridian's star and broke it into colors humans don't quite have names for. Beautiful, yes. But that's not what I was looking at. I was looking at the docking ramp and the 6 figures descending it, because word had already come down from the captain that this delegation was going to require particular handling. The Velthani are not, by any conventional measure, a warrior species. They're administrators, scholars. They've been a spacefaring civilization for 11,000 years. Which, for context, is about 10,000 years longer than humans have had electricity. And in that time, they've built an empire that runs on precision, hierarchy, and an absolute conviction that their way of doing things is the correct way because they've been doing it the longest. They're not cruel exactly, just certain. Certain in the way that people are when they've never been genuinely challenged. Lord Karind Velshavar was the head of the delegation. I'd read his file on the transport over. 47 cycles old, roughly equivalent to late 30s in human terms, descended from one of the founding houses of the Velthani Ascendancy, educated at institutions that had been producing administrators since before the Roman Empire existed. He held 3 academic titles and a governmental rank that translated, loosely, to Deputy Minister of External Affairs, which meant he had authority over a significant chunk of his government's relationship with non-Velthani species, including humans. He was tall Velthani usually are, averaging 2.5 meters, with the elongated limbs and the pale iridescent skin that catches light the way mother-of-pearl does. His secondary eyelids were the deep amber that indicates high noble rank in their culture. His robes were a layered affair of some material that moved like water and shimmered like oil on puddles. He looked, if I'm being completely honest, like the physical embodiment of ancient inherited confidence. He stepped off the docking ramp, looked around Meridian Station's docking bay, and the expression that crossed his face was one I'd learned to recognize over the years. Translators get good at faces. It was the expression of someone who had expected less, and gotten less than they expected anyway. He recovered quickly. Velthani nobility trained their faces from childhood, but I caught it, and I filed it away. The formal welcome was held in the Accord's primary reception hall, which our diplomatic team had spent 3 days arranging specifically to avoid giving offense to any of the species in attendance. Neutral color palette. No symbols that could be interpreted as territorial claims. Temperature set to a compromise that left everyone mildly uncomfortable, which is actually the diplomatic sweet spot. Nobody feels like the room was designed for someone else. I was stationed near the human contingent because that's where my translation duties were focused. The Earth fleet had sent a small team to serve as military liaisons during the transit negotiations, 4 officers and their support staff. Not combat personnel. Protocol officers, mostly. Except for Marcus Darren. He wasn't protocol. He was a pilot, which was, by all accounts, extremely strange. You don't usually attach combat pilots to diplomatic missions. They serve a specific purpose aboard warships and carriers. They're the people who take machines designed to break physics and hurl them at enemies at speeds that make fast seem like an understatement. And that purpose is extremely narrow and extremely specific, and does not typically involve diplomatic receptions. But Marcus Darren was attached to our mission because the Accord had recently acquired a new auxiliary vessel, an Earth-manufactured fast courier called the Threshold Run, and someone in the bureaucracy had decided that said vessel needed a qualified pilot, and Marcus Darren was the pilot they'd found. I met him the morning before the reception. He was sitting in the crew mess, drinking coffee, actual coffee, which told you something about the man's priorities given how expensive the real stuff was this far from Earth, and looking at something on a datapad with the focused quiet of someone who wasn't really thinking about what they were looking at. He was shorter than I'd expected. Most Earth fleet officers I'd worked with had the height that years of low-gravity service can give you, bones that spread just a fraction more, posture that opens up with months spent in vacuum rotation. Marcus Darren was compact, not small but solid, built close to the ground the way certain Earth animals are built close to the ground, the way things that have survived terrain build themselves. His face was what I noticed most, though. He was somewhere in his mid to late 30s. I found out later he was 38. But he looked simultaneously younger and older than that. Younger because there was still something unguarded in the way he held his coffee cup, some ease in the set of his shoulders that hadn't been trained out of him. Older because of his eyes. Dark brown, almost black in the mess hall lighting, and deeply, absolutely quiet in a way that isn't peace. That particular quietness, I'd seen it in a few people over the years. It's the quietness of someone who has been somewhere where being loud gets you killed and never quite forgot. He noticed me watching him, and he didn't startle, just looked up, steady as a wall. "You're the translator," he said. "One of them," I said, "Yara Osai. Deck 3, Linguistics and Cultural Liaison." He set the datapad face down. "Marcus Darren, I fly the Threshold Run." "I know." I hesitated, then sat down across from him because the mess was nearly empty, and his was the most interesting face I'd seen in a week. "You're not a protocol officer." "No. So why are you?" "Somebody needed to fly the ship," he said, and picked up his coffee. "I fly ships." It wasn't rude, it wasn't dismissive, it was simply final, the end of a topic. I noticed later that was a habit of his. He didn't close conversations with hostility. He closed them with a kind of calm completeness, like he'd said what was true, and what was true was enough. I liked him immediately, which was either my instincts working correctly or my instincts going to get me into trouble. Probably both. The reception that evening started the way all diplomatic receptions start, with everyone performing a very specific kind of boredom disguised as interest. The Velthani delegation moved through the room with that particular grace that extremely tall, extremely confident species tend to have. Lord Velshava was at the center, naturally. He had 2 advisors flanking him, both female, both wearing the secondary rank amber that indicates administrative nobility, and a personal aide trailing half a step behind. The aide was young, barely out of adolescence by Velthani reckoning, and he had the wide secondary eyelid look of someone trying very hard to look like he belonged somewhere he wasn't sure he did. I sympathized. The Velthani moved through the introductions gracefully. They were practiced. Their expressions were calibrated. I watched them greet Captain Thessaly of the Accord, a tall human woman who had the bones of someone who'd spent most of her life in varying gravity, and the exchange was smooth, formal, correctly executed. Then Captain Thessaly moved them toward the Earth Fleet officers. "Standard protocol. You introduce the Allied military contingent, acknowledge the relationship, create the social connection. It should have taken 3 minutes and generated no content whatsoever." Lord Velshava's expression didn't change when he was introduced to the Earth Fleet team. It stayed at exactly diplomatic neutral. But I watched his secondary eyelids. Velthani's secondary eyelids, the inner nictitating membrane, do things that the primary eyelids don't. They're less trained. They react to emotional states more quickly than the face does, and it takes most Velthani a significant amount of practice to control them. Lord Velshava was very good at controlling his. But not perfect. When Captain Thessaly said Earth Fleet Liaison Team, representing the United Earth Defense and Diplomatic Corps, and the 4 officers stepped forward, Lieutenant Orrin Park, Lieutenant Commander Sufia Anand, Commander James Ketterly, and then Marcus Darren, the Lord's secondary eyelids flickered. Just once, but it was the flicker of amusement. The dinner that followed was where it started in earnest. I was seated at the secondary table. Translators don't get primary placement unless there's an active negotiation happening. But I had clear sightlines to the main table, and I was, as always, paying attention to everything. Lord Velshava was seated across from Commander Ketterly, who was the senior Earth Fleet liaison and who had enough diplomatic training to hold his own. They were talking about the Terminus Passage negotiations, the actual political content of the visit, and it was going reasonably. Marcus Darren was at the end of the table, not a diplomatic seat. He was there because he was technically attached to the mission and had to eat somewhere. He had the quiet, slightly apart quality of someone who knew they were at a dinner party and not a dinner party simultaneously. He was eating, I noticed, with a kind of focused attention. Not like he was hungry. The food on the Accord was excellent but Velthani influenced. Lots of mineral-heavy crystallized proteins and atmosphere-grown vegetation, which most humans found fine but not exciting. He was eating the way he did most things, I was starting to understand, with complete, unhurried presence. The trouble started, as trouble often does at diplomatic dinners, with an apparently innocent question. One of the Velthani advisors, the older of the two, Ambassador-designate Sivra, whose file I'd memorized, leaned slightly across the table toward Commander Ketterly during a conversational lull. Her tone was pleasant. Her phrasing was impeccable. "Commander," she said in the careful, slightly formal interstellar trade tongue that all species use for negotiations, "I am curious. Earth has been a member of the Galactic Coalition for only how long now? 60 years. 63 standard years, Commander Ketterly said. 63, yes. She nodded, the slow, formal inclination of the head that Velthani use for acknowledgement. And in that time your species has progressed significantly. Your adaptation to interstellar travel, your fleet infrastructure. It is, if I may say so, quite remarkable for a species so young." "Thank you. Particularly," she continued, and her secondary eyelids had a particular steadiness that I'd learned meant a Velthani was choosing their words with precision. "Given that Earth itself is, well, quite challenging, yes, your homeworld, the conditions there." "Earth has a diverse range of environments," Commander Ketterly said carefully. "Of course, I only mean we have studied your planet naturally as part of the coalition integration process. The atmospheric pressure variations, the temperature ranges, the gravity, which is quite high for a developed civilization. The biological density, the predators, the disease vectors," she smiled. "It must have been very difficult, before space travel, before medicine and technology. How your species survived the early millennia is quite the academic question among certain researchers. It wasn't vicious, but it wasn't kind either." What she was saying, translated through the diplomatic softness. Your planet is brutal, and it's somewhat remarkable you weren't wiped out by it. Commander Ketterly handled it well. He smiled and said something measured about environmental pressure producing adaptation, which is the diplomatic way of saying yes, and look how that turned out, and the conversation moved on. But I watched Lord Velshava's face. He was listening. And the amusement was there again, subtle, contained, but present. The private amusement of someone who finds other people's politely phrased condescension entertaining because they share the sentiment. His gaze drifted down the table, to Marcus Darren. He studied the human pilot for a moment. The compact build, the worn-in quality of the dress uniform, still pressed, still correct, but with the particular fit of someone whose clothes have gone through things. The quietness. "And you," Lord Velshava said. His voice carried down the table without effort. Velthani have resonant vocal architecture, their speech designed to project through large spaces. "The pilot." Marcus Darren looked up from his meal. No startlement, no rush. He looked up the way he did everything, which was like he'd been ready for it the whole time and was simply doing it now. "Sir," he said. "You fly one of your Earth vessels," Velshava said. "The small courier." "The threshold run, yes." "A courier?" The Lord tilted his head slightly, not an impolite gesture, but the angle had a quality to it. The angle you use when examining something curious. Earth-built vessel. Earth-manufactured hull, hybrid drive system. Velshava made a small sound. To his advisors, just loud enough to be heard, not quite quiet enough to be private, he said something in High Velthani, the formal dialect, the one that sounds like mineral bells and running water. I translated it in real time, automatically, the way you do when your brain has been trained to it. He said the humans put their pilots in rooms when they're not needed, like instruments in a case. It was not quite an insult. In Velthani culture, referring to someone as an instrument isn't necessarily derogatory. Instruments have function, but the tone was the thing, the private joke quality of it, the assumption that it would either not be understood or not matter. Ambassador-designate Sivra made a soft sound, the Velthani equivalent of a suppressed laugh. I glanced at Marcus Darren. He was looking at Lord Velshava. He hadn't moved, hadn't reacted. But his eyes, those very dark, very quiet eyes, had a quality in them now that I couldn't quite name. Not anger. Not hurt, something older than both. "You speak High Velthani?" Lord Velshava asked him, perhaps noting the direction of the gaze. "No," Marcus Darren said and paused. "Not yet." Which was its own answer somehow. Lord Velshava looked at him for a moment, then smiled, gracious and distant, and turned back to Commander Ketterly. Marcus Darren went back to eating. I wrote in my personal log that night, "Watch the pilot, something about him." The mocking, once it started, had a pattern to it. Not cruelty, I want to be careful about that word. The Velthani weren't cruel in the way that cruelty is usually practiced. They didn't go out of their way to wound. It was more that they were comfortable. Comfortable in their certainty about what humans were and what they represented, and comfortable enough to express that certainty in the small, dismissive ways that ancient privilege tends to express itself. Over the following 2 days, we were in transit toward the negotiation site, a neutral station near the terminus entry point. I watched it happen in accumulating increments. Lord Velshava asked Commander Ketterly at one morning briefing whether human pilots required special accommodation for their missions, whether the psychological strain of high-speed transit affected human physiology more significantly than other species. He asked it thoughtfully, with apparent concern, but his secondary eyelids said something different. Ambassador-designate Sivra commented, during a tour of the Accord's navigation systems, that human interface design was quite intuitive for a species with limited sensory range. She meant it, I believe, as a compliment. It did not arrive as one. And Marcus Darren, the pilot, the man in the dress uniform with the coffee habit and the quiet eyes, was a particular object of the low-grade fascination. I watched Velshava watch him. It was specific, that watching. The Lord was intelligent, genuinely so, not just born into it intelligent, but the kind of mind that keeps working even when the body is at rest. He noticed things, and something about Marcus Darren caught his notice the way an unexpected detail catches a scholar's eye. He didn't quite know what to make of him. So he defaulted to the most comfortable framework available. Primitive species, interesting specimen. On the second day, I was in the corridor outside the secondary briefing room when I heard the exchange. The door was ajar. I wasn't eavesdropping, or I wasn't intending to. I was simply walking past when the voices stopped me. Lord Velshava's voice, in interstellar trade tongue, measured and curious. "You have done combat missions in your Earth vessels." Marcus Darren's voice even, "Yes." "How many?" A pause, enough. "You are modest." The Lord's tone had that quality I was starting to recognize, the careful interest of a person who finds something mildly entertaining and is decided to understand why. Or perhaps uncertain of the count. "No," Marcus Darren said. "Not uncertain." "Then modest," Velshava made a small, considering sound. "On our world, warriors record their engagements. It is a matter of pride, heritage. The count defines the legacy." Silence from Marcus Darren. "On Earth," Velshava continued, and here was the thing, here was the particular quality of it, Your combat history is quite brief, yes. By galactic standards, your species has been warring with itself for most of your recorded history, only now beginning to learn what genuine conflict means at the galactic scale. Said Marcus Darren, I only mean there is a learning curve. All young species experience it. It is nothing to be ashamed of. Marcus Darren's voice, still even, but something underneath it now, something that wasn't quite in the words. I would not have used that word, Lord Velshava said smoothly. No, Marcus said, I don't think you would have. The silence that followed was the kind that is weight. I kept walking, but I thought about what I'd heard for the rest of the day, turning it over the way you turn a stone over to see what's underneath. That night, the second night of transit, there was a small social gathering in the Accord's observation lounge. These are common on diplomatic missions. You put species together in informal settings, give them drinks that are carefully selected to be inoffensive and mildly pleasant to multiple physiologies, and let the social instinct do what social instincts do. Sometimes real conversations happen in those rooms. Sometimes alliances begin over shared beverages. Sometimes you just watch someone get under someone else's skin in slow, polished increments. Lord Velshava was holding court, that's the right word for it, near the forward observation window, where the view of the transit corridor filled the glass with streaks of compressed light that turned the whole room gold and silver. He was talking to 3 of his advisors and Captain Thessaly, and his voice had the easy authority of someone who expects rooms to listen. I was near the edge of the gathering, translating as needed, watching. Marcus Darren was at the far end of the lounge, standing alone near one of the secondary observation ports. Not socializing. Not avoiding socializing either, there was no tense energy to it. He was simply standing and looking out at the transit light, the way you stand and look at something that is what it is, and doesn't need anything from you. He had a glass of something, water, I thought, or possibly the pale mineral drink that the Velthani had contributed to the evening's selection. He was holding it without drinking it and looking out at the stars. Lord Velshava noticed him. I saw the moment the Lord's attention shifted, the almost imperceptible angle of the noble head, the small pause in his speech before he smoothly re-engaged with Captain Thessaly. Then, in one of those moves that powerful people make so naturally they may not even be fully aware they're making them, Velshava excused himself from the group near the window and moved through the room toward the observation port where Marcus Darren was standing. I drifted closer, professional habit. Lieutenant Commander, the Lord said. Marcus Darren turned, Lord Velshava. Velshava looked out at the transit light. Side by side they were a striking contrast. The Velthani Lord tall and crystalline and iridescent, the human pilot compact and dark-eyed and still. I find these transitions meditative, Velshava said. The compressed light, we have a philosophical tradition around it, in fact, the idea that at transit speed one exists in a space between states. Neither here nor there. The Velthani metaphysicians call it Velsharath, the in-between. That's a good word for it, Marcus Darren said. You have experienced many transits, I imagine, in your career. A few. Velshava glanced at him, the secondary eyelids steady, thoughtful. You are, he paused, a considered pause, the kind that knows exactly what it's doing. Forgive me, I am curious about something, and I hope you will take the question in the spirit of genuine inquiry. Go ahead. Your service record. I have read the summary provided by your coalition liaison file, only the broad strokes, nothing restricted. But I noticed that your assignment history includes some unusual postings for a pilot. Marcus Darren said nothing, waiting. You served on Earth's southern continent, Velshava said, before your fleet service, in what your military calls a special reconnaissance capacity. Yes. Ground service, Marcus said, before I qualified for atmospheric flight training. Ground service, on Earth. Velshava tilted his head again, that gesture, that angle. In the Ch-Thon Reach territories, the southern continental interior. Something shifted in the air around Marcus Darren. It was subtle, the way pressure changes before weather shifts, nothing visible, but I felt it standing 5 meters away. Yes, Marcus said. Fascinating, Lord Velshava said, and his voice had that quality, warm, interested, and underneath the warmth, that certainty, that comfort. We have studied Earth's geography, of course. The Ch-Thon Reach is quite extreme, even by Earth standards. The humidity levels, the temperature variance, the megafauna density. He paused. I understand that relatively few of your soldiers volunteered for service in those regions. The attrition rates were quite high. He said it like an academic saying something interesting about a historical conflict. They were, Marcus Darren said. And yet you served, therefore, the file said 3 years, in an infantry capacity. 2 years, 4 months, and a little. Extraordinary. Velshava looked at him with what appeared to be admiration. It might even have been real. Your species' capacity to endure difficult conditions is quite impressive. At the biological level, I mean, the physiological adaptations, the pain tolerance. The drive toward self-preservation in extreme circumstances. He paused. It is a remarkable survival mechanism, primitive in some respects but effective. Primitive in some respects. I watched Marcus Darren's face. I have been trying to find the right word for it since. It wasn't blank. Blank implies the absence of something. This was the presence of something that had been trained to be very, very still. Like a deep lake that looks smooth from above and you genuinely cannot tell how far down it goes. Yes, Marcus said, survival mechanisms are effective that way. Lord Velshava smiled, gracious, satisfied in some way I couldn't entirely identify. I hope we will have more opportunities to speak, he said. I find humans genuinely interesting. As a subject. He turned and moved back toward the center of the room. Marcus Darren turned back toward the transit light. I stood at the edge of the room and felt something that might have been anger or might have been apprehension or might have been both, and watched the compressed stars streak past the observation port like they were trying to get somewhere fast. I found Marcus Darren in the crew mess at 300 ship time. I couldn't sleep. I keep odd hours anyway when we're in transit. The light compression does something to human circadian rhythms, nothing serious, but enough to nudge the body clock sideways. I'd gotten up to get tea and found him sitting in the same spot I'd found him the first morning, same posture, same coffee, same face. Same datapad face down. I sat down across from him. He looked up. You were there, he said, not a question. Some of it, I said. I drift toward interesting conversations, professional hazard. He looked at me for a moment, then he looked at his coffee. He's not wrong, he said. About what? About the Ch-Thon reach, the conditions, the attrition. He turned the coffee cup slowly in his hands. He's got the facts right, he just doesn't know what the facts mean. What do they mean? I asked. Marcus Darren was quiet for a while. Long enough that I thought the conversation was closed in that final way of his. Then he said, have you ever been somewhere where everything, and I mean everything, the air, the water, the ground, the things living in the ground was trying to kill you? Not in a dramatic way, not in a movie way, just as a constant, unending, perfectly indifferent fact. No, I said. It's not like anything else, he said. It's not fear exactly. Fear is a spike. Fear is a moment. It's more like weather. It's like living inside whether that never changes. He paused. And you're there for months and then more months. And you're watching the people next to you and you're watching the signs and you're learning the sounds and you're learning which plants to avoid and which mud to walk on and which water is death and which is just water. And you're doing it every single day. And then one day you realize. He stopped. Realize what? I said. He looked at me. That you stopped being afraid, he said, not because the danger went away. Because there's a thing that happens when danger is constant and total and all-directional. Your brain, human brain specifically, your brain stops processing it as fear and starts processing it as information. He put the coffee cup down. It becomes data, he said. This plant is hostile. This sound means movement. This pattern in the water means something's underneath. You stop running from it and you start reading it, because you've had no choice but to read it for so long that it's just how you see. I sat with that for a moment. He thinks that's a survival mechanism, I said. Primitive, his word. Yeah, Marcus picked the cup up again. He's not wrong that it's a mechanism. He's just wrong about what it produces. What does it produce? He looked out the mess hall window at the transit corridor, light streaming past, in between. A kind of person, he said, that the galaxy doesn't have a lot of experience with. He drank his coffee. I went back to my cabin and didn't sleep for another 2 hours. turning those words over and over in the dark. We arrived at Terminus Station on the fourth day. Terminus Station is newer than it sounds. The name suggests something ancient and terminal, the end of a long road. In reality, it's about 16 years old, built in a rush when the passage was first confirmed viable, a necessary outpost that the galactic community had agreed needed to exist before anyone could quite agree on who owned it. It's mid-sized by galactic standards, maybe 200 permanent residents, a rotating population of traders and diplomats, and the particular class of person who goes where the edges are. It smells like machine oil and recycled atmosphere, and something I can never quite identify, something mineral, and cold that the environmental systems never fully scrub out. I like it. It has the realness of places that exist because they have to, not because anyone planned them. The negotiations were set to begin the following morning. The evening was, officially in the schedule, open. Informal, an opportunity for both delegations to settle in and prepare. Which meant it was the kind of evening where things actually happen. Terminus Station's common area is called the Crossroads, officially the Central Commons, but nobody calls it that. It's a large circular space at the junction of the main 4 corridors, high-ceilinged in a way that makes it feel like being inside a drum. The vendors and traders and station residents have colonized the edges with stalls and tables, and the particular chaos of commerce that springs up wherever diverse species stay for more than a week. I was there with Lieutenant Oren Park, buying something fried and slightly alarming from a Kethari food vendor. Kethari frying technique involves sonic vibration rather than heat, and the results are genuinely excellent if you don't think too hard about the mechanism. When the commotion started. It started as sound. Raised voices, a specific frequency of raised voices that translators learn to identify fast, the frequency that means species barrier is contributing to the problem. Then a kind of ripple through the crowd, people moving back, creating space. Oren and I moved toward it automatically, not heroically, just toward because that's what you do. At the center of the cleared space, 3 Velthani. Not the delegation, not Lord Velshava or his senior advisors. These were the younger members of the delegation's support staff, the ones who'd come aboard to handle the logistics and record-keeping and the dozen small tasks that diplomatic missions generate. They were young, late adolescents to early adulthood by Velthani reckoning, and they had that specific quality that young people of powerful cultures sometimes develop when they're away from home supervision for the first time. Certain that the rules still apply to other people, less certain that they apply to them. They had surrounded a small figure near one of the corridor junctions. Small by galactic standards, barely 1.5 meters. A Treth, I recognized the species immediately, the compact gray-brown form, the large secondary eyes adapted for low-light environments, the quick nervous movement of the hands. The Treth are a recent addition to the coalition, only 40 years since first contact, still finding their footing in the larger galactic community. Their homeworld is a dim, cold planet in one of the outer systems, and they tend to travel in family groups because the galaxy can be overwhelming when you're used to a world where the biggest city has 30,000 people. This one was young, alone, carrying a container of goods, trade wares. It looked like small things, and the 3 Velthani had positioned themselves in a way that was not technically threatening, but was functionally quite threatening in the spatial social geometry that every species shares. One of the young Velthani was speaking, loudly, in High Velthani, which the Treth almost certainly did not understand, but the tone was universal and the tone was not kind. I was pulling out my translation device and trying to calculate the fastest route through the watching crowd when I saw Marcus Darren. He was already there. He'd come from a different direction, from the far corridor, and he was there before I was because I don't actually know how. He moved through that crowd without, and this is the part I've thought about a lot, without disturbing it. The way water moves. No push, no friction. One moment he was part of the crowd, and then he was through it, and he was in the cleared space between the Treth and the 3 Velthani, and he was just standing there. Not between them in a confrontational way, not squaring up, not bristling. Just there in the space, still. The 3 Velthani went quiet. There's a thing that very large, very confident species do when they encounter something significantly smaller that doesn't behave the way significantly smaller things are supposed to behave. They go still themselves, briefly, in the automatic recalibration of expectations. Marcus Darren was still smaller than the Velthani by a significant margin. He was still wearing his off-duty clothes, plain, dark, nothing that signified rank or authority. He had nothing in his hands. He wasn't doing anything that could be called aggressive by any operational definition. But the three young Velthani had gone completely quiet. I watched from the edge of the crowd. Marcus turned to the Hreth. He went down onto one knee, bringing himself closer to eye level with the small being, and he said something in trade tongue, quiet and direct. "Are you all right?" The Hreth's hands were shaking, large secondary eyes moving fast. "I have wares," the Hreth said, in trade tongue, their accent heavy with the consonant-heavy patterns of their native language. "I have the ones they said I cannot, my license I have." "I know," Marcus said, same voice, the quietness that wasn't peace. "You have your license and you're fine. Do you have somewhere to go?" "My family, in Corridor 7. I was. Corridor 7 is that way." Marcus tilted his head, indicating the direction without pointing, a small thing, but pointing is aggressive in Hreth body language, and somehow he knew or intuited that. "I'll walk with you if you want." The Hreth looked at him, then looked at the three Velthani. Then back at Marcus. "Yes," said the Hreth, "please." Marcus stood. He turned to the three Velthani. He looked at them, all of them, a gaze that moved from face to face with the calm comprehensiveness of a military sweep, and he said in trade tongue, plainly, "We're done here." It wasn't a question. The tallest of the three Velthani, the one who'd been speaking, drew himself up. 2.5 meters of inherited confidence looking down at the human who had interrupted something. The amber secondary eyelids had gone hard. "This is not your concern," the young Velthani said. "No," Marcus agreed, "it's not." He turned and walked with the Hreth toward Corridor 7. And the crowd parted for them. I watched it happen and felt the small hairs on my arms rise in a way that I couldn't immediately explain. Lord Velshava heard about it within the hour. Diplomatic vessels are small social environments, and small social environments generate rumors at the speed of boredom. I wasn't present for his initial reaction, but Ambassador-designate Sivra told Captain Thessaly, who told me, that Lord Velshava had expressed, and I'm paraphrasing Sivra's careful diplomatic language here, that the human pilot's intervention had been well-intentioned but unnecessary, and that the young members of his staff were simply unfamiliar with Hreth customs and had not intended offense. Which was possibly true, and also completely beside the point. Captain Thessaly handled it with her usual precision. She expressed that she was glad no misunderstanding had escalated, and that Lieutenant Commander Darren's actions had been consistent with Coalition community conduct standards, and that she was sure Lord Velshava's staff would find the station's intercultural briefing materials useful. Extremely diplomatic. What I noticed was that Lord Velshava, for the first time since arriving, had stopped looking at Marcus Darren with that particular quality of private amusement. He was looking at him with something else now. Something that required, I thought, more careful calibration. The negotiations began the next morning and ran for 3 days. Standard pace for coalition territorial discussions. Everyone talks more than they decide, and the decisions are made in the spaces between the talking. I was in and out of the negotiation chamber constantly, translating, clarifying, bridging the moments when trade tongue wasn't quite capturing the nuance that needed to be captured. Marcus Darren was, officially, not involved in the negotiations. He was present on the station for the same reason he was present on the Accord. Someone needed to be ready to fly the threshold run if a courier was needed. He spent his days in a way that I gradually came to understand was his default mode. Present, quiet, useful in small ways that accumulated without announcing themselves. He fixed a water recycler in the station's secondary corridor that the maintenance staff hadn't gotten to yet. He translated trade tongue for a Kethari trader who couldn't quite manage the relevant dialect. He had a conversation with 2 of the youngest members of the human liaison staff who were finding the mission stressful, and I wasn't close enough to hear what he said, but afterward they looked less stressed. He did things. Small things, constant things. Quiet, and Lord Velshava watched. I caught him doing it twice, standing at the edge of his advisor group, his attention apparently on the negotiation documents or his staff's reports, but the angle of his gaze slightly off. Trained toward the human pilot, who was doing his quiet, small, useful things on the periphery of the important spaces. The secondary eyelids were doing something new, not amusement, not the hardness from the corridor encounter. Something I couldn't quite name yet. On the second evening of negotiations, there was a station event that nobody had planned for. Weather in space stations doesn't happen, obviously. You don't get rain or wind or temperature front variations. But Terminus Station, being 16 years old and operating on a tight budget, had a climate control system that occasionally, not often, but occasionally, developed what the maintenance chief called atmospheric cascades. What that meant, practically, was that sections of the station could experience rapid pressure changes that set off the safety systems. The safety systems respond to rapid pressure changes by sealing bulkheads and triggering the emergency lighting. At 21:40 station time, on the second night, 3 of the station's 7 main corridors went to emergency seal, including Corridor 7, where the Atreth family quarters were located, and including the secondary generator room that handled life support for corridors 4 through 7. I was in the main commons when the lights changed, and I'll say this for the station's emergency lighting. It is completely functional and absolutely terrible for human psychology. Red-orange, strobing at long intervals, turning familiar spaces into something that feels like a warning. The station crew moved efficiently. They'd dealt with this before, apparently, issuing directions and getting people moving toward the primary commons, which was in the stable zone. Most people responded to the official guidance. But in the secondary corridor near the junction, there was a problem. The Atreth family from Corridor 7, 7 of them, 3 adults and 4 children in the small compact huddle of beings used to close quarters low-light navigation, had been in the commons when the seal happened. Their corridor was locked. They couldn't reach their quarters. The children were frightened. Atreth children produce a subsonic vocalization when distressed that most species can't hear, but that registers as a feeling, a low, uncomfortable vibration in the chest. And the corridor to the secondary processing area, the fastest route to the manual override for the bulkhead seal, ran through a section that the atmospheric cascade had filled with a vapor byproduct. Not toxic, but dense. Visibility near zero. The station crew were calling for the proper equipment before sending anyone through. I watched this situation develop from 20 meters away, trying to calculate options, when Marcus Darren walked past me. He walked past me and he went to the station crew chief and he said something quietly. The crew chief, of Ethani, not Velthani, different species entirely, stocky and pragmatic, looked at him and said something back. I was too far to hear. Marcus Darren nodded, took off his jacket, handed it to the crew chief. The crew chief looked at him for a moment, then handed him a small device, a pressure gauge, I think, and pointed toward the vapor corridor. And Marcus Darren walked into the vapor corridor. I stood very still. The station crew chief stood very still. About 3 meters from me, I became aware that Lord Karind Velshavar of the Velthani Ascendancy was standing at the edge of the scene, having apparently come from the direction of the delegation quarters, and he was watching. Not with any of the expressions I'd catalogued. Something new, something that was working through frameworks it hadn't needed before. 6 minutes. We know it was 6 minutes because the station's emergency log records everything. 6 minutes from when Marcus Darren entered the vapor corridor to when the bulkhead seal on Corridor 7 disengaged, and the lights shifted back to standard illumination. He came out of the corridor on the other side. The station schematics had him traversing roughly 40 meters of near-zero visibility, finding the manual override panel, operating it correctly, and returning. He was coughing slightly when he came back through, the vapor having the quality of something that irritates the respiratory tract without causing lasting harm. The Atreth children ran toward their now-open corridor. One of the Atreth adults, the eldest, a being old enough that their gray-brown coloring had gone somewhat silver, paused as they passed Marcus Darren. They looked up at him with the large secondary eyes that see better in dark than in light. They said something in their native language. I caught maybe half of it. I'd done a basic introduction to Atreth linguistics once, not enough to translate conversationally. What I caught was, the word for sea, and the word for without fear, and the word for dark, and the formal address form used for elders and those who have earned a specific kind of respect. Marcus Darren listened to it, and something moved across his face, something quick and warm and then gone, like light off water. He said in trade tongue, "Make sure the kids get something warm. The vapor lingers in the system. Best to breathe warm air for a bit." The Atreth elder nodded and moved on. I turned to look at Lord Velshava. He was looking at Marcus Darren. His secondary eyelids were completely still, not controlled still. Simply still, the way things go still when the mechanism has stopped, because it's received something it doesn't know what to do with. Marcus Darren saw the Lord looking. He met the gaze, steady, not challenging, not anything. "Just present." Lord Velshava said nothing. Marcus Darren retrieved his jacket from the station crew chief, thanked the woman quietly, and walked back toward the delegation quarters. I watched the Lord watch him go. And I thought, there it is, that's the thing starting. Part 3, the understanding. The negotiations concluded on the third day. A provisional agreement on terminus passage management, weighted in a way that nobody found perfect, but everybody found workable, which is the definition of a successful negotiation. Both delegations signed the framework document. Captain Thessaly was pleased. Commander Ketterly looked tired in the specific way that sustained diplomacy produces, not exhausted, but wrung out, like a cloth that's been twisted. Lord Velshava signed on behalf of the Velthani Ascendancy with the formal amber stylus that his aide had carried in a special case for the entire journey. His signature was a specific crystalline pattern. Velthani's signatures are works of art, each one a miniature representation of the signer's house lineage. He signed it and looked satisfied. Then he looked across the table and asked if Lieutenant Commander Darren was available for a conversation. I was asked to translate. Not because Marcus Darren needed translation, his trade tongue was functional and clear, but because Lord Velshava had specifically requested a translator present for the conversation, which is what you do when you intend a conversation to be on the record, to have weight. We met in one of the station's small conference rooms. Lord Velshava, his personal aide, Marcus Darren, and me. Marcus sat the way he always sat, hands on the table, shoulders easy, quiet. Lord Velshava sat across from him, and for a moment just looked at him. The way you look at something you've been trying to figure out and have decided to simply ask. "I owe you an apology," Lord Velshava said. Marcus Darren said nothing, waiting. "I have been," the Lord paused, choosing words with the precision of someone who chooses words professionally, and is choosing these words more carefully than usual. "I have been conducting myself toward you and your species from a framework that I am beginning to understand is incomplete, and I am aware that acknowledging this in front of a record translator represents a formal diplomatic recognition of error. I am making that acknowledgement intentionally." "Okay," Marcus Darren said. "I would like to understand," Lord Velshava said, "if you are willing, what you survived specifically." Silence. "Not as a study," the Lord said, and something in his voice shifted. Something that might have been discomfort, the particular discomfort of someone reaching the edge of a certainty they've lived in for 47 cycles. "Not as a curiosity. I am asking because I have been watching you for 5 days, and I have reached the conclusion that I am missing context, significant context, and I would rather have the conversation than continue without it." Marcus Darren looked at him for a long moment. Then he said, "How much do you know about the Thon Reach?" "Your file said." "Not my file," Marcus's voice was still even. "The place, the actual geography, do you know what it is?" Lord Velshava looked at his aide, who produced a data pad. The aide read off the standard coalition entry, Southern Continental Interior Earth. Subtropical to tropical climate zones, high humidity, extensive canopy forest, temperature range 28 to 47 degrees Celsius in active zones. Classified in the Coalition's Xenobiological Hazard Index as Class 4, significant biological density, multiple apex predator species, hostile microbiological environment. Marcus nodded at the recitation. "Class 4, he said. You know what the hazard index scale tops out at." "Class 7, the aide said. "Class 7, Marcus agreed. Tura's world is Class 7. The Scarith wastes on Hellion Prime are Class 7, environments where survival for unprotected biologicals is measured in minutes or hours. He paused. Class 4 means survival is possible. It means that with training, with adaptation, with the right knowledge, a human organism can survive in that environment. Indefinitely. He put both hands flat on the table. The Ch-Thon reaches Class 4 on the Hazard Index, he said. The index was written by a Cathari survey team 40 years ago, working off surface scans and 3 days of ground observation. He looked at Lord Velshava. They didn't go deep enough. The Lord was very still. Deep enough for what? He said. For the interior zones, Marcus said. The index accounts for the megafauna, the large predators. You've got your Class 3 carnivores, the pack hunters, the ambush species. Those are the ones the survey team logged. What they didn't fully account for was everything else. He paused. The microbiological environment alone, the fungi, the parasites, the bacteriological load in the water and soil, would classify as hostile by any standard the Coalition uses for hazard zones. But they're microscopic, so they don't make headlines. The canopy collapse zones, areas where the forest structure becomes too dense for standard environmental suits to navigate, where visibility goes to zero and sound behaves differently because of the moisture density and the tree architecture. The flood cycles, you get 3 meters of water in 6 hours during the major rain events, and it doesn't behave like water, it behaves like a medium. You don't wade through it, you move in it. He stopped. I was in there, he said, for 2 years and 4 months with a unit of 22 people. We went in for a reconnaissance mission that was supposed to be 90 days. What happened? Lord Velshava said. The extraction infrastructure collapsed, Marcus said. Political problem, back-end complication, doesn't matter now. We were in for 90 days and then the extraction didn't come and then another 90 days and then another. He looked at his hands. At the end of 2 years, there were 11 of us. The room was extremely quiet. 11 people, Lord Velshava said. 11 people, Marcus said, who knew every sound that environment makes, every smell, every pattern of light through that canopy that means something is about to change. We knew which water to drink and which would kill you in 8 hours and which would kill you in 8 weeks. We knew which predators hunt at what time and we knew which plants are toxic and which are food and which are medicine. He paused. We knew how to sleep in an environment that is trying to kill you. That is a thing, by the way, learning to sleep. When your nervous system has adapted to constant threat, you stop sleeping the way normal people sleep. You sleep in layers. Part of you rests and part of you keeps reading. Keeps reading, Lord Velshava repeated. Information, Marcus said. Sound, pressure, air movement, temperature shift, you're always reading, even asleep, because you've been in an environment long enough that your brain has recategorized constant threat from danger to data. It's processing rather than reacting. He met the Lord's gaze. It doesn't go away when you leave the environment, you just carry it. Lord Velshava sat very still. His secondary eyelids were doing something I'd never seen them do before. They were moving slowly, the nictitating membrane traveling in the unhurried way that indicates deep cognitive processing in Velthani physiology. Not quick flicker emotion, slow pulse thought. The corridor, the Lord said. 2 nights ago, the vapor. Low visibility, mild respiratory irritant, Marcus said. 40 meters known endpoint, manual panel, standard Coalition design. I've trained on Coalition infrastructure. He shrugged, a small lifting of the shoulders. It wasn't complicated. It wasn't, Lord Velshava stopped himself. Something moved across his face. To walk into zero visibility, unknown hazard without equipment. The hazard wasn't unknown, Marcus said. I asked the crew chief what the vapor composition was before I went in. It was a silicon particulate atmospheric byproduct. Irritant, not toxic. 40-meter corridor with a linear layout, no branches, no decision points. Known destination, standard equipment. I've navigated worse by smell. He said it simply, not for effect, just because it was true, and true things are worth saying plainly. Lord Velshava looked at him for a long, long moment. You said, the Lord said carefully, that the knowing that it doesn't go away. No. The reading, you called it reading. That's what it feels like, Marcus said. You walk into a room and you're reading it. Temperature, air movement, sight lines, what's between you and the exits, what the people in the room are doing with their hands and their weight. You're not thinking about it. It's just running, underneath. Always. Always. Velshava was quiet. On your homeworld, he said slowly, the Chthon Reach, how much of Earth's surface does it cover? The full Reach complex? Marcus considered. Maybe 8% of the total surface area, but terrain like it, similar hazard class environments, covers another 20–25%. Different zones, different specific threats, same basic category. A quarter of your planet, Lord Velshava said. About that. And before space travel, before modern technology. Your species evolved in this environment. We evolved across the whole planet, Marcus said, which includes the Reach-class zones, yes. Velshava looked down at his hands for a moment. Velthani hands are elegant, 4 long fingers, joints that flex in multiple directions, the capability for extremely fine motor work. The hands of a species that built its civilization on art and administration and scholarship. He turned them over, looking at them. My planet, he said. Veltha, you would know it from your coalition briefings. The climate is stable, has been stable, genuinely stable, not oscillating around stability for 40,000 years. We have 9 apex predator species. 7 of them are in protected nature reserves. The other 2 exist in ranges that have not overlapped with settled Velthani population centers for 11,000 years. He paused. We have never, in all of our 11,000 years of recorded history, had a period where our species faced meaningful extinction risk from the environment. Marcus Darren looked at him. I have been, Lord Velshava said, referring to your species' conditions on your homeworld as though they were a deficiency, something to be survived despite, a primitive hardship that more developed species had moved beyond. He stopped. I am beginning to understand that I had this entirely backwards. The room was quiet. What your species survived, the Lord said. What you specifically survived, it did not produce what I assumed it produced. It didn't produce damage, or limitation, or primitive mechanisms with no application beyond the immediate. No, Marcus agreed. It produced something I don't have a word for, Lord Velshava said. In Velthani, I don't have the word. Marcus Darren looked at the Lord for a long moment, and something in his face shifted, not softening, exactly. More like a door opening slightly into a room with a lot of light in it. In English, Marcus said, we call it there's not one word actually. We say hardened or tempered, like metal. You put metal into heat and pressure and it doesn't just change. It becomes more of what it was. The impurities burn away and what's left is, he paused. What's left is what the metal actually was underneath. Lord Velshava looked at him. We have a word, the Lord said slowly. In High Velthani, it is an ancient word. We use it for the oldest materials, crystalline structures that have been under planetary pressure for millions of years and have become something new, something that does not break. He paused. The word is Veltharan. What does it mean, directly translated? The thing that pressure made true, Lord Velshava said. Marcus Darren was quiet for a moment. Then he said, yeah, that works. I've been trying to figure out how to end this account for a while now. The official version is simple. The negotiations concluded successfully. The Velthani delegation departed Terminus Station with the provisional agreement. Lord Velshava made a formal note in the diplomatic record, which I was asked to help phrase, acknowledging the contribution of the Earth Fleet Liaison Team to the mission's success, with particular commendation of Lieutenant Commander Marcus Darren's assistance in a station emergency. Diplomatic language, precise, calibrated, correct. But there's a moment that happened after the conference room conversation, after the Lord and his aide had left and Marcus and I were walking back through the Terminus Station corridors toward the docking bay, that I keep coming back to. He was quiet the way he was always quiet, but different somehow. Lighter maybe, not noticeably, just a fraction. We were walking past the main commons, and I saw, across the room, the Atreth family. The silver-furred elder and the 3 adults and the 4 children. They were eating something from one of the vendors, and the children were arguing about something in the fast-clicking way that Atreth children do, and it was completely ordinary and human and real. The elder saw Marcus. From across the commons, the elder raised one small gray-brown hand. And Marcus Darren raised his hand back. Just that. I thought about Lord Velshava's word, Veltharan, the thing that pressure made true. I thought about the Chthon Reach. 8% of a planet's surface that functions as a near-constant extinction threat, and the people who went into it and came back fewer, quieter, carrying something the rest of the world doesn't quite have words for. I thought about Marcus Darren walking into that vapor corridor without hesitation, without drama, because the crew chief told him the composition was non-toxic, and 40 meters was nothing, and there were children who needed their corridor open. I thought about his voice at 300 in the crew mess, saying, a kind of person that the galaxy doesn't have a lot of experience with. And I thought, standing in the Terminus Station Commons, while a Atreth elder and a human pilot acknowledged each other across a room full of beings from 17 different star systems, that he was right. The galaxy has been meeting humans for 63 standard years. 63 years, and we still keep catching it by surprise. Not because we're loud, not because we're dramatic, not because we announce ourselves, but because what Earth made us, what 11,000 years of surviving the unsurvivable made us, that doesn't look like strength from the outside. It looks, from the outside, like a compact figure in a slightly worn dress uniform, drinking coffee at 300, turning a datapad face down and looking up with eyes that have already read everything in the room and filed it and moved on. It looks like ordinary, until the corridor goes dark. And then it looks like something the galaxy doesn't have a word for yet. Lord Velshava, 6 months after the Terminus negotiations, submitted a formal academic paper to the Velthani Ascendancies Institute for Interstellar Cultural Studies. I was sent a copy by a contact in the diplomatic exchange program. The paper is titled, in translation, On the Recategorization of Adversity as Inheritance, a study of Terran developmental biology and its galactic implications. It is, by any measure, one of the most thorough treatments of human environmental adaptation produced by a non-human scholar. In the opening passage, he writes, and I'm summarizing, not quoting, because the Velthani academic style is dense, and the full sentence runs 400 words, that his previous framework for understanding developing species had been constructed around the assumption that a difficult origin is something a civilization grows away from, that the mark of advancement is the removal of the environmental pressures that produced a species. He writes that he was wrong. He writes the mark of advancement in the case of the Terran species is not the removal of environmental pressure. It is the transformation of pressure into capacity. They do not carry their Deathworld behind them as a wound. They carry it as a foundation. What they were made in, they were made by, and what they were made by is not gone. It is present. It is them. Every individual human being is, at the cellular level and the psychological level and the structural level, the compressed record of what their planet demanded and what their species provided in return. There is a word in the old Velthani, Veltharan, the thing that pressure made true. I did not expect to use it for another species. I am using it now. I keep that copy. I read it sometimes. Not for the scholarship. For the admission. Because there's something necessary, I think, in the moment when an ancient and certain mind looks at something it was sure it understood and says, I had this backwards. Let me start again. That's its own kind of strength, even if it doesn't survive a Deathworld to earn it. The last time I saw Marcus Darren was in the docking bay of the Celestine Accord, the morning we departed Terminus Station. He was running pre-flight checks on the threshold run. Outside the vessel, walking the hull with the patient thoroughness of someone who checks because checking is worth doing, not because he expects to find anything. The docking bay lights were the functional yellow of working spaces, and the threshold run was small beside the Accord's bulk, compact and capable in the way of things built for function rather than impression. I was passing through on my way to my duty station. I stopped. Lieutenant Commander. He looked up from the hull check. Safe transit, I said. He considered me for a moment. Then something at the corner of his mouth moved, the smallest thing. And you, he said. He went back to the check. I went to my station. The threshold run departed 30 minutes later, small and fast against the depth of space, carrying one human pilot who saw everything in every room he walked into and said almost nothing about it and needed nothing said. The Accord followed on the Meridian transit route. Behind us, Terminus Station turned on its own slow axis.